Thank you all so much for coming out today. This is a bit of a test for us. We usually do this in the middle of the season, so I thought there might be 20 people that showed up. So thank you very much indeed for your interest in Rancho Mirage, and thank you to the library for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about the wonderful history of the city. We have a lot of history, as I discovered when I was writing the book Mod Mirage, and in fact, there was so much the editor of the book kept on encouraging me to cut it down. I wrote way too much. I could actually write another book, and also since I finished this book, I have made so many more discoveries that I could quite happily start all over again. But I'm not going to. This is the only one you'll get. So today we're going to talk about the historic neighborhoods of Rancho Mirage, and the reason I'm talking about these today is they feature quite heavily in the book. When I started putting the chapters of Mod Mirage together, I thought no one ever really focuses on the smaller homes that people live in or the communities that people live in. You always get coffee table books that are filled with gorgeous pictures, which of course ours is, because my husband took photos. But usually the houses included a big palatial, gorgeous architectural digest type homes. And in this book, we created a section called Communities. And it was in researching the book that I realized they had a really big part of the story in Rancho Mirage. So post-war, what happened here in the desert as well as across the United States is that we had a huge housing boom. By 1962, 50% of all housing in the United States was post-war, which is quite an astonishing amount. Even though this talk is supposed to start in 55, I've taken a liberty, artistic license of going back a little bit further, to talk about Ronald Button, because Ronald Button was a very savvy developer. He was a Hollywood lawyer. He was also a very political animal. He became treasurer for the state of California. And he came to Rancho Mirage dashing through, according to Don Cameron, who was managing the land. And he bought 100 acres at $80 an acre in 1944. And he had every intention of coming back and building houses. And so in 1946, when he'd finished, okay, I have to break off for a moment. His job during the war was as Army Signal Corps Motion Picture Division, hanging out with Ronald Reagan at the Hal Roach Studios. And I didn't know you could have a job in the Army Signal Corps and work in a motion picture division. I just thought, good heavens, what a cushy number. So that's what Ronald Button was doing during the war. So he didn't have far to come back out to Rancho Mirage. And he ended up buying all the rest of the land, which is now what we think of as Magnesia Falls Cove. On the right is Ronald Button, the guy with the crazy eyebrows. Remember, incredibly successful Hollywood lawyer. And he married, this was his wife, Gladys McConnell, who was absolutely astonishingly beautiful. They had a gorgeous Art Deco home in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. And he and his Button and Culver started building. They built about 100 houses, first of all, up in Magnesia Falls Cove. And it was called Rancho Mirage. That had been the name of it from back in the 20s. And these were the type of advertisements that they placed far enough away, yet not too far. This is the place you've always dreamed of, an enchanting desert retreat. And this was an early ad from 1948. So in the 1950s, this is kind of fuzzy aerial view, but I want to give you an idea of what was happening and how Rancho Mirage was growing. This is Highway 111 going across from the diagonal of this picture. This is, I think this is where Bank of America is now, and Waller's Desert Turtle is there, so this is Rancho Mirage Lane. And there was a swimming pool that they created for this new community, for the subdivision that was right there. On the left was Whispering Waters Hotel, which is now an assisted living. And this is Sahara Road going up here, and this is the Magnesia Falls Cove subdivision as it was then. Just to give you an idea, now I know this map is upside down. Everyone has said to me, "Are you sure you want it like that?" Well, I do, because it kind of shows you, the shape of the shape there. And so, yes, it's upside down. And so what I wanted to show you is that this is where the swimming pool was, and hopefully they filled it in before they built on top of it. And that's an assisted living area, but it's still actually the Whispering Waters Hotel. It's actually been redone as a kind of Santa fake architectural style, and the river is down here. Hedy Lamarr, isn't this an amazing picture? I think this is going to be my look for Christmas this year. I wish. Hedy Lamarr was one of Ronald Button's clients, and he persuaded all his business acquaintances and his clients to buy houses in Rancho Mirage. And she actually owned a house. I don't really know how often she came out here, but she was one of the first film stars to live in the Rancho Mirage subdivision, as it then was. And there were quite a number of other clients of his that bought houses. So in 1952, this is a full-page ad from the Palm Springs telephone directory. By now, they had over 100 houses built, and they advertised a number of amazing benefits, like picture book kitchens, 2-car garages, matching appliances that were delightful color coordination, colored refrigerator and built-in ice maker, everything you could want, basically. And A. Ronald Button was listed as the owner. I think what's interesting at this time is that they now started advertising themselves as the country club area, because by 1952, Thunderbird and Tamarisk were, of course, up and running. So that became, as it did for all these small communities, a big selling point. They were close to Thunderbird and Tamarisk. This ad is also from 1952. It kind of cracks me up for two reasons. One is the birdcage. I was thinking, why would you use that photo to promote your house? But anyway, that's just so odd. But the other thing, I wish this sign was still there, but this was the sign that pointed people from Highway 111 up to the subdivision, and it talks about the swimming pool and all the fantastic, beautiful desert paradise and colored kitchens and everything else. So just so weird, they put a birdcage in there. So Button and Culver were busy developing the homes, and then Ronald Button became incredibly politically active. He actually became the national chairman of the GOP committee, and he also became state treasurer for California. And so he was away for a couple of years, basically ignoring what was going on. In the meantime, Art Linkletter actually became related to him by marriage, and Art Linkletter was very entrepreneurial, as you may be aware. He had a lot of development businesses, and he and Button had developed some other property out in the San Bernardino area. So Button said, "Okay, Art, you've got to help me out here. I need to really build some more houses." And between them, they actually developed a lot more of Magnesia Falls Cove. They built another couple of hundred homes. So by the time Art Linkletter bowed out about a year later, they had 350 houses altogether up in Magnesia Falls Cove. What you can see here is the really mid-century modern design of this one, with the walls of windows in the living room pointing out towards the view. And here's a house, just one of the few. There's probably about half a dozen, maybe 10 of these. This is the one that kind of most clearly represents the original design. And it's one of the many beautiful mid-century modern homes up in Magnesia Falls Cove. Jeff Chandler, if you're of that generation, you might remember he was nominated for an Oscar for a film called Cochise. He was a very good-looking Jewish guy who always got these roles playing Arabs and Native American Indians. His hair went white really early, and he was kind of very famous for that. He actually died a very sad death only a few years later after some surgery that went wrong. This is an art Linkletter house too. It's a different model, but you can see the wall of windows in the front. And this is what it looks like today. It's been incredibly well preserved. I was really fortunate to meet the owner at the time who'd done a lot of work to it. It's now owned by a European couple who only stay in it about 2 weeks a year, but it's an amazing house, very original. So by 1957, Button needed to get back to Sacramento to take care of his treasury job, and Art Linkletter had other fish to fry. So they sold the whole subdivision, all the rest of the land, which I think was still another several hundred acres, to a Beverly Hills company called Desser and Garfield. And Desser and Garfield actually were responsible for developing the whole commercial center around Rancho Mirage. So many of you know where Cargo Consignments is, or was, I should say. That used to be the Safeways, and that whole strip next to it was developed by Desser and Garfield. So they kind of made Rancho Mirage more of a town at this time. It was still advertised as being in this location, at this time, this was what Rancho Mirage was. Further west, it was still Cathedral City, and further east, Palm Desert. But they were advertising the country clubs being close by. Desser and Garfield brought in a different style of architecture. This is a tri-gable house up in Magnesia Falls Cove, and you'll see quite a few of these there as well. And I think what's so interesting to me about this area of Rancho Mirage is that you can drive around and you can see Frank Morgan's house that was built in the 30s, and you can see houses from the 40s that Ronald Button did that are really quite simple. They're made out of cinder block, basically. And then you can kind of trace the architecture of that particular subdivision through the developers and through the ages. So by 1965, Garfield from Desser and Garfield was still involved, and they were developing houses up on Halgar Road. And I only just realized the other day, why Halgar? It's such a strange name. And then I went, oh, of course, Harold, Garfield, Halgar. So in case you've ever driven down that road and thought, what a strange name, that's why it's called that. But I'll come back to him. He's an interesting guy. So I couldn't have a talk about communities without talking about Blue Skies Village, of course, which is still very much there and still very much a part of our history and our community. As most of you know, if you live here year-round or even half the year, this was developed by Bing Crosby. Now, Bing Crosby had come to the Rancho Mirage when Thunderbird Country Club opened. He was a very keen golfer, and he built one of the first houses up in what we now know as Thunderbird Heights. And about the same time, he bought 22 acres of land stretching along Highway 111. And it was around the time that White Christmas came out, so obviously his star was fully risen, and he had no problems at all getting all his entertainment friends to join in and invest in his idea for this deluxe trailer village. It sounds like a weird thing. Why would you develop a trailer village? But in Palm Springs at that time, the most popular form of vacation home was, in fact, in a trailer village. And some were better than others. This one he really built as a luxury village. And he got 48 fellow stars to invest. And this sign on the right-hand side is the names of all the streets, and is also the names of the people that invested. So you've got people like Rosemary Clooney, Jose Ferrer, Lauren Bacall, Jack Benny, Danny Kaye, Humphrey Bogart, pretty much anyone who was anyone at the time said, oh, okay, Bing, we'll give you some of our money, as if he needed it. But anyway. So here's Bing on his golf cart, and in the background is a swimming pool for blue skies and the clubhouse. On opening day, he got all the celebrities to show up, and here we've got Lauren Bacall standing by the Jack Benny parking meter, which was a joke because if you remember Jack Benny, his character was notoriously cheap, and so the idea of him having a parking meter there was so that he could actually gain some funds if anyone parked outside. It's kind of a cute story. What you can also see here is that the trailers then were very much that. They were trailers pulled by cars. So you've got an Airstream on the right, and you've got another car-pulled trailer here. Then what happened was over time, is anyone here from Blue Skies? Can't see. No. Over time, trailers were actually replaced by single wides or double wides. And the community became much more of a sort of permanent place rather than a weekend place. This was the obligatory swimming pool. You remember Ronald Button had put one in at the Rancho Mirage subdivision, and here was a 65-foot swimming pool for blue skies. They had a beautiful village green and putting green, and it still is a really lovely place. So they very wisely hired William F. Cody, who's one of the most famous of the desert modern architects, to master plan the community. And this is something that was in the Cody archives up in San Luis Obispo in Cal Poly. Of course, this didn't get built, but it's so intriguing to me. He was asked to design a commercial frontage for Blue Skies Village. And once the village was up and running, it would be up to the residents as to whether they wanted to have this built. And in point of fact, of course, they didn't. But this is the swimming pool and the clubhouse here. This would have been, probably a diner like a Sambo's or something, shopping and that kind of thing here. And of course, you can see all the cars are pulling trailers. Some are bigger than others. Look at the size of this thing. But beautiful rendering by Cody. They also got Cody to design ramadas, and this is one that I found in the file at Cal Poly. So this would be the size of the trailers back then, and subsequently replaced by a single wide, but you can see the ramada is still the Cody design. This is a particularly beautiful example. So then what happened? In the sort of mid-50s, people started looking at different ways of developing communities. This idea of actually having a kind of resort-style community had really taken off. The Blue Skies idea needed to be developed a bit more. So these cooperative single-family residence resorts or planned unit developments became a thing that were really exclusive to Rancho Mirage. My talk today isn't going to nearly cover all of them, but nearly all of them are in the book. And in the city's historic survey, it talks about how each of these were experiments at combining the best aspects of single-family housing and community living. Inherent in the plan is the belief that a country club resort atmosphere naturally encourages socializing in common areas. And that was really how these were designed, with central pools and clubhouses with individual homes gathered around them. This is one of the first, the really commercial single-family residence community, and this was developed by Robert McCulloch. Robert McCulloch was a very successful industrialist and entrepreneur. He owned McCulloch Motors that basically had chainsaw motors, car motors, powerboat motors. Subsequently, he bought Lake Havasu and imported London Bridge. So he was a man with big ambitions. And at the time, this is Thunderbird Country Club just over here. He was building the amazing push-button home. I don't know if any of you saw my last talk on some of the crazy homes, but I showed a video of Huell Hauser visiting that house. So he decided to buy a piece of land on what's now Bob Hope. This is Rio del Sol. And he hired architect Richard Leach, who was famous for developing housing tracts. And they built 39 houses, very close to Thunderbird Country Club. Johnny Dawson is on the left, and this is Robert McCulloch here, and this is the architect. And Richard Leach described each house is different. It was observed by architect Richard Leach that what we have attempted to do here at Tierra del Sol is to design desert resort houses that will appeal to people with different situations, whatever that means. They've actually changed the signage since we took this picture, but it's still there. If you're driving down Bob Hope, just after, if you're driving from Highway 111 down Bob Hope and you've got Rancho Las Palmas on the right, it's further down on the left. So these are individual houses, and they're all 39 are still there, but some have been remodeled and some have actually been changed altogether. But they had a clubhouse and a central swimming pool, which they still do today, and a private road that goes around it. And this whole community won a 1957 AIA award for Richard Leach for his master planning. It was considered a pretty special place. This is a Julius Schulman picture from soon after the houses were opened. They had these gorgeous color-coordinated kitchens with all the blue cabinets and blue appliances and so on. On the right is a shoji screen. These were really popular in the 50s. You could pull that across. That was a den, or it could be a bedroom. And then he'd put the glass up here too, so you could still have light coming through. The den led out to a patio. I think the floor is cork. So a different kettle of fish is Thunderbird North. On the face of it, looks kind of the same idea, and broadly speaking, it is. But what was different about this, it was 10 custom-designed houses that were commissioned by the individual owners. And this was a development that was started by a famous Dallas developer called Pollard Simons. He got Cody to master plan, and he was really good friends with Eisenhower, as was Monty Moncrief, who was a famous Texas oil man who got Cody to design this house. This house here belonged to Jimmy Hines, who was the first golf pro. And what you can see here is an amazing, I think it was a 3-hole golf course with a sand trap and a putting green. And so you can imagine, everyone here was a golf fanatic. They were just crazy golfers. They were right across from Thunderbird Country Club, which is just here. And so you can imagine they had really good fun with Jimmy Hines knocking on his door every morning, saying, "Excuse me, can you just give me a quick round to get me warmed up?" These are some pictures I found actually at Thunderbird Country Club. They didn't know what they were, and I recognized them immediately. So this was when Thunderbird North was being created out of sand, and you can see the landscaping is just going in, the swimming pool is going in there. And about a year later, you can see it's really grown in. Beautiful community. It was opened during Modernism Week about 2 years ago, and it sold out in one day. I think they had about 600 people through there. This is the Pollard Simons house. It's actually on Country Club Drive, and if you're driving up and down Country Club, you might see it. It's by Morningside. And this is a Jimmy Hines house, also by Cody, which is next door. This is Tamarisk Ranchos, same idea, these single-family residences gathered around a community pool. This one was designed by William Kreisel, and he master planned the houses all to face inwards, which confuses our FedEx and UPS delivery people no end. But the great thing about it was, going back to that point that was made in the city's survey, is it really did encourage socializing. So you can imagine back then in 1958, Groucho Marx actually had his weekend home there. And we have our house there, of course. We're very famous. And the person that owned our house originally was the TV producer who did You Bet Your Life and Ozzie and Harriet and the Art Linkletter shows, funnily enough. So Groucho had his house here, and this modest little place here was his. The house on the right belonged to the guy that started the Writers Guild. His name was Harry Tugend, and he wrote all the road movies with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. And so this community of 16 homes was kind of behind Tamarisk Country Club. It was developed by Lou Halper, who was one of the founders of Tamarisk. And all the people that had houses here were connected to Tamarisk Country Club, and actually mostly to Hillcrest Country Club in Los Angeles, which is really how Tamarisk got started. The community was made up of Groucho Marx's friends, but also quite a few of Frank Sinatra's friends. So Frank Sinatra's banker, Al Hart, who was the founder of City National Bank, and his doctor, Dr. Crone, both had houses at Tamarisk Ranchos. I'm happy to say that we're actually a historic district, and with the city of Rancho Mirage, some of these smaller communities are now applying for historic district status, and what that means is essentially is that we can't tear the houses down. So the community will look like that in perpetuity. No one can tear their house down and build something new. And we think we're very passionate about our community. We love it the way it is. We don't want anything to change. So we're pretty happy about that. So what happened next is co-ops. And in co-ops, it's a slightly different game, because it was a way for people to buy cheaper housing, like apartments, without having to get a mortgage or insurance on the mortgage, which the government wouldn't allow at that time. This was an article that appeared in Palm Springs Life, and the caption says, "Now look here, Jones, there's a limit to this co-op bit." I can't say that with an American accent, but you get the picture. Not very politically correct. But co-ops were really popular, and when this article came out in Palm Springs Life, it said togetherness is a thing called co-op apartments. In less than 6 months, 6 cooperative apartment projects have been launched in Palm Springs alone, while another half dozen have sprung into being in the unincorporated territory around the city, in other words, Rancho Mirage, and at least that many more in the planning stage. And this was the trend. The trend was towards co-ops. It says, they appear to be the biggest thing to sweep the desert since cactus. Just love the way they wrote back then. So the first in Rancho Mirage, and really the biggest in the whole valley, was Desert Braemar. We have some people from Desert Braemar here today, happy to say. I love Desert Braemar, and you'll find out why in a minute. But Desert Braemar is, it's virtually opposite City Hall. If you don't know it, and you have the opportunity to go in maybe during an open house or something like that, really recommend it. It's still run as a co-op. It's for over 55s. It has 100 units. Most of them are apartments. Either there are a couple of single-story homes, and there are quite a few two-story townhouses. And Desert Braemar was really an amazing marketing exercise by a company called the Braemar Corporation that were building these in other parts of Southern California. They had one in Los Angeles, actually on Sunset Strip, which was a tower block, also cooperative, and another one in Redlands. And they decided, okay, Thunderbird and Tamarisk are up and running. People are looking for an alternative, like they were with Blue Skies, a trailer. They were looking for small houses, either at Tierra del Sol or an apartment at somewhere like Desert Braemar. So it offered an amazingly economical solution for people who wanted a home out here but couldn't afford a big house on a golf course. And of course, these were super maintenance free. Everything that was prescribed for owners at Desert Braemar was included, even having people do your shopping for you, which I thought was pretty amazing. I think partly because there wasn't a supermarket very close by. But it was a beautiful community, and it was very successful. Desert Braemar held an event in Palm Springs called Braemarama, and they invited people to come visit model apartments that were designed by Arthur Elrod, who was a very famous interior designer. And they paid 25 cents a time, and they raised something like $4,000 for the community chest, which was pretty amazing. The person that designed Desert Braemar was a bit of a character himself. His name was John C. Lindsay, and he had spent the war working as a senior set designer at MGM. And afterwards, he was a qualified architect, but during the war, this is kind of what you ended up doing. He partnered with Palmer and Kreisel for about a year, and there's an amazing interview online with William Kreisel from, I think, back in the 80s or 90s, where he talks about Lindsay. Lindsay at the time was married to a Warner Brothers starlet, and Kreisel was single. And apparently Lindsay was supposed to be a partner bringing in lots of celebrity clients, but Kreisel actually confessed that one of the main reasons he was brought in as a partner was to get dates for William Kreisel. So Lindsay, was actually a very talented architect. He did a lot of work in Los Angeles. And he subsequently married June Lockhart, who was the star of Lassie and Lost in Space. And as you can see, he liked to drink, presumably, and he advertised Lord Calvert whiskey and also Chesterfield cigarettes. And in his AIA file, I came across a letter from the AIA to him saying, excuse me, you're not allowed to do that. So he got his wrist quite firmly slapped, and I think he almost lost his license. So this was the inside of Desert Braemar. I've got a woman doing something untoward with a sheepskin rug in the middle here. And some rather beautiful, I believe that's a Barcelona chair, and some amazing kind of concrete terrazzo fireplace around. And this talks about distinguished architect John C. Lindsay, designer of some of California's outstanding buildings, widely recognized for his ability to blend nature's setting and man's structures into pleasing unity. In the Desert Braemar, he has utilized colorful modern structures against tranquil vistas of the dunes and distant hills to create a residence of distinction in an environment of modern elegance. And what's actually, I realized the other day, I'm just going to flip back, that when Desert Braemar was built, they did actually kind of color code the buildings. And it took me ages. I thought this was just a badly reproduced postcard. But it took me ages to figure out, actually, so you've got green down here, and you've got pink up there, and you've got something that looks kind of lilac lavender right there. So apparently that was what they decided to do. This was the cover of Villager magazine at the time, Desert Braemar, with horses by the pool. I don't think you'd get that anymore. But that was a thing back then. The palm trees and the grass and everything else is still there. It's really been beautifully looked after, and this is what it looks like today. Some really, it's not sort of incredibly mid-century in terms of being lots of angles or, you know, indoor-outdoor, but it has a lot of elements to it, like this slump block brick and these rather lovely railings. It had Bermuda roofs. In fact, at one time, all the roofs were Bermuda roofs. And this gives you another idea of the detail. Another co-op that was built at the time in Rancho Mirage is this funny little place. It started out, I think it was supposed to have about 50 cottages as co-ops, again with a swimming pool. And they were going to be very cheap, about $18,000. And it's still there, but I noticed there were bulldozers in the back of it the other day. The sign is still there. There's still about 15 houses, but it's been very neglected, and I'm sort of sad to think that it's probably going to go. But it's past its best. Fortunately and happily, Duvall Estates is still running as a co-op, and is still a fantastic community as well. This has been open during Modernism Week a couple of times. It'll be open again in February. And this was a community of 20 apartments, all of them are 1,400 square feet, built by Robert Marks on land that was given to him by his father, who was Gummo Marks of the Marks Brothers. The Marks Brothers owned a lot of land around Rancho Mirage, including around Tamarisk Country Club. And this was a piece of land that Gummo basically gave to his son and said, build something. And Robert Marks is still alive, and I took him to Duvall Estates a couple of years ago and introduced him to the current residents, and they virtually got down on their knees and, you know... He had such a great time. He actually started selling again. He said, oh, God, I can't believe it. I'm trying to sell these places again. Everyone he walked through was a Modernism Week visitor, and he was just kind of giving them the sales spiel. It was really cute. So he hired architect Val Powelson, who designed a lot of beautiful homes and Indian Wells Country Club, the first version of it. And Val Powelson apparently didn't like right angles, and so everything in this community was built at an angle. So this is the aerial view, and as you can see, each one of these points of the X's was an individual apartment. The only adjoining walls they had were in the center, and that was storage space, either for golfing materials or whatever you wanted to put in there. And each apartment excuse me, had a similar layout, but of course they all had different aspects, and they had lots of light and community gardens and a pool. This is a contemporary photograph, and what you can see here is this is an amazing fireplace, so it's kind of triangular shaped. And Powelson intersected the blocks at the edges so that as the sun moves around, it casts these amazing diagonal shadows on the side of the fireplace, which I think is just such a spectacular detail. One of the apartments was featured in Architectural Digest early on in the early 60s. And you can see here all this amazing lacquer furniture and shag carpet. And I was fortunate enough to be able to visit this unit, which had been kept absolutely the way it was, with all the same furniture. And this was what it looked like a few years ago. Berna, who owned it, sadly passed away, but she really had kept it in fantastic condition. So all this furniture was still there, and you could see it in the previous image. The person who bought it kept all the furniture and lacquered it black. He's a single guy. This is obviously much more to his taste, but I really appreciate what he did, because he did keep the spirit of it by keeping all the furniture, and the rest of the interiors are exactly as you would imagine. From an architectural point of view, these 1,400 square foot apartments are incredibly well laid out. What you have is everything comes to a point, both at the end facing out and at the interior. And so what you end up with is a room, once you walk in the front door, that's actually something like 32 feet in length, which for a 1,400 square foot apartment is pretty clever. And then you have a wall of windows around the entryway and along this side, another wall of windows along here. There's a master suite in here, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a guest suite kind of behind the kitchen. So if you ever get a chance to visit during Modernism Week, please do, because they're so unique, and each one has its own character. Then what happened was condominiums. So a couple of people have asked me about this in the past. Why did it change from being co-op to condominium? Well, it was, again, government regulation. So in 1961, Congress authorized the FHA to insure mortgages in parcels of airspace in the form of multiple housing units. So in 1964, California adopted the condominium law, and from then on, I think it's fair to say we'd been doing pretty well in development terms, but really condominium law, we were off to the races. There was no holding back in development, as you'll find out. So condominium differs from a co-op in as much as the owner secures the title to the property, they own the land, in most cases, rather than owning shares of stock in a corporation that owns the property, which is what a co-op is. Monthly payments are on mortgages as well as maintenance fees now for all the grounds and things like swimming pools and so on. Say hello to the HOA. Chalet Palms, going back to Magnesia Falls Cove for a minute, this was 1965. This one is going to be on a tour in Modernism Week in February. It was a community of 30 units built on very tight 2 acres and designed, as we discovered, by Barry Burkus. Barry Burkus became incredibly famous later in his career, was known actually throughout the world. And at this time, he had done 2 small communities in Palm Springs. One is Park Imperial South, which has a folded plate roof, and the other one is called Merito Manor. They're both quite often open during Modernism Week as well. And so what you have here is the kind of chalet-style roof line that basically covers a breezeway in between the apartments. We discovered not very long ago that the developer, Basil Collier, who was married to Hal Garfield's daughter, remember Harold Garfield? Basil Collier is still alive at the age of 94 and living in Los Angeles, and by a fluke I managed to get hold of him. And we didn't know who the architect was, but he remembered actually appointing Barry Burkus to design this. And it has really beautiful landscaping. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember who he'd hired. But the landscaping within the community, as you can see, don't see much of it from the outside, but inside, obviously, you've got everything that you could want in a small resort-style community, the pool, the putting green, which I don't think is there, but the grounds are really attractive. And they were being sold from upwards of $18,000 with underground utilities, the unusual landscaping, and the great location. So this was an old advertisement that shows the original palm trees and so on, all of which are still there. The stone wall is still there. It faces Sahara Road. The steps lead up actually on both sides of the wall. Just a really beautifully designed place. Tamarisk West, probably known to many of you as one of the biggest of the condominium developments at that time. So it started in 1965 as fabulous Tamarisk West, and very fabulous it is still to this day. Again, a group of condominiums gathered around a swimming pool. It started out with, I think, 22 units, and the houses were kind of raised up on a berm so that the pool was down below, and this way the houses got better views of the mountains. The architect on the second phase has just recently been identified as Michael Black, who is a well-known desert modern architect. The developer was S. Charles Lee, and S. Charles Lee was most famous in the 30s for designing all those incredible Art Deco movie palaces around the United States, as well as the Max Factor building in Hollywood. In fact, a lot of the really beautiful Art Deco buildings in Hollywood were designed by S. Charles Lee. His daughter was Connie Kiter, who was married to his business partner, George Kiter. And Connie was a really fantastic golfer, amateur golfer, and so the theory I had was that he developed this so that she could go and play golf at Tamarisk whenever she wanted. This was a feature in Palm Springs Life. A lot of the apartments in Tamarisk West were actually had interiors by Arthur Elrod, who I mentioned before, very famous interior designer. And this was a feature article about Tamarisk West, talking about the spacious luxury. And by this time, a lot of the condominiums that were being built were getting bigger. So at Tamarisk West, they varied from 2-bedroom to 3-bedroom, but they really were spacious. Thunderbird Villas. Now, most of you probably drive past the entrance to this without knowing anything about it. The entrance is right next to Thunderbird Heights as you drive along Highway 111. I was kind of surprised to see how far back this dated to. So Richard Leach, who you'll remember was the architect who did Tierra del Sol, was commissioned to design the first phase of Thunderbird Villas. And they were done very much in a kind of Spanish style, Mediterranean style, that was beginning to come back into fashion at this time. I think it was really kind of a precursor to what happened later with Mission Hills. If you think about it, Mission Hills totally took the Mediterranean style. And these were houses that were developed along terraces. So the first phases are actually the closest to the gate. And as you go further up, the houses get newer, but each terrace had its own swimming pool. The houses, as you can see inside, also had this Spanish influence with these open beam ceilings and a brick fireplace, kind of adobe-style fireplace, and of course a shag rug. So the last condos I'm going to talk about in this particular moment were the last condo project by William F. Cody. These are just on Tamarisk Country Club's 10th fairway. There's 8 of them. Again, bigger by this time. These are all about 3,000 square feet with a central atrium. A lot of Cody's distinctive characteristics like slump stone brick and the walls of glass, but with a kind of hacienda style with the stucco chimney and deep set windows and doors. And again, the community swimming pool and community grounds. Really a tremendous development, which also has historic district status. Again, the owners, even though they, like everywhere, they get bought and sold, they are very proud of their community. They don't want it to change, and so they applied for historic district status from the city of Rancho Mirage. So we talked a lot about successes. I'm going to talk to you about a really resounding failure, because, you know, I'm that kind of way. I like talking about some of the mysteries, too, that exist. I wrote an article about this place for Desert Sun newspaper a couple of years ago because I was so intrigued. Sky Mountain was somebody's folly, really. His name was Merton Baker, and he came up with this idea that he bought 680 acres of land over where kind of Misty's is, you know, up in that whole area behind Misty's. And he started blowing the tops off mountains. And the article I wrote for the Desert Sun talks about the mystery of the flat top hills. So when you drive along from east to west along Highway 111 and you look over to the right, you'll see lots of hilltops that have flat tops. Some of them are empty still to this day. Some of them have houses on top of them. And so what this guy, Merton Baker, decided to do was destroy mountaintops but build up a mountain of debt. And he had this, you know, fantastic time. I think he was really a kid at heart. He just wanted to blow everything up. And I can't imagine what you thought if you were playing golf at Thunderbird and all these explosions suddenly went off. You were probably showered with debris. So this is the amazing picture that somebody at Desert Braemar found in their history archive. This kind of shows you, this is where Misty's consignment store is. which of course I know because I go there regularly. This is Mirage Cove Drive with the palm trees leading up. Here's Highway 111. This was where the chart house used to be. That's the hill right there. And then this is all the earthwork that he did. Can you see? I mean, just crazy, right? I mean, nuts, all the way up here, all the way along here, all the way up there, around here, down here, all of this. I mean, just nuts. I can't believe he was allowed to do it, really. But, of course, he went bankrupt. But what he did leave us with a few things. He left us all these lovely palm trees. And he left us this really lovely group of townhouses, which I'm going to show you in a minute, which kind of overlook the back of Mister's parking lot. 2 sets of condominium buildings here, which are absolutely gorgeous as well. He had actually, Merton Baker had appointed Cody to master plan all of this, and I can't find anything in Cody's archives, and I think probably Cody just went, this guy's a nutcase, and threw everything away. But his loss was our gain, because we do have that, and we also have another souvenir, which was ours for a while, was the Rancho Mirage City Hall. Actually, there were 2 of these amazing hexagonal buildings. Sorry, just flipped through too far. These are the condos that I think are really spectacular. They're up on Stella Drive. And these are the townhouses that look out onto the other side. This is kind of the best view you can get of them, but architecturally, they're super intriguing. They have kind of hidden windows behind these walls. So then what happened was that all the developers started realizing, other than Merton Baker, that they could make a lot of money. They could make a lot of money by having a lot of money to start with, which I don't think Merton Baker had. But in the late 60s, the condo concept really took hold, and it combined with golf to create these mega golfing complexes like Mission Hills. In 1969, Mission Hills was breaking ground with plans for 1,200 condos built around 2 golf courses to the tune of $50 million. By 1972, the first 80 condominiums at the desert's first high-rise, Desert Island, were also completed, part of a $20 million luxury residential and golf community. So people were thinking big, and they were really building big. And this was the difference between what had happened early in the 50s and 60s was that the condo idea had taken hold, and they realized that they didn't have to, like Thunderbird and Tamarisk, sell individual lots. They could come in with huge amounts of funding from outside investment, mostly, and start building these huge golf course developments, which is what then the Springs in 1973, and then, of course, Sunrise in 1974. So you can see how quickly things suddenly changed from the last sort of 8 condos at Tamarisk Country Club that Cody built in 69-70. All of a sudden, those were just not even economically viable. You had to build big. And I came across this article, Rancho Mirage is becoming country club city. I'm just going to read you a couple of things. The 15 miles within the city's boundaries house 6 of the valley's biggest and most elaborate country clubs. And it might be added, this is where it all began, referring to Thunderbird and Tamarisk, of course. The article goes on to say that the Springs was about to open with plans for 862 units on 390 acres, that Sunrise would eventually contain 744 units on 190 acres. Mission Hills by this time had built 120 condos, with more planned on 680 acres, including golf courses. And Desert Island called for a total of 4 7-story buildings with 326 units. So this is why I get kind of misty-eyed about the old things. Not that I think that there's anything wrong at all with all of these, but when you're driving around Rancho Mirage and you get the opportunity to go into the smaller communities as well as the bigger communities, I wanted to give you this illustration today of how this all came about. So that's the end of my talk, essentially. Just wanted to tell you about one thing, how to research your home's history, in case you're interested. I'm doing a free seminar here at the library on November the 4th at 10 a.m. You have to pre-register on the library's website. That's it.